Thanks again for joining us tonight. I'm Chris Hearn. I'm the West Tennessee Field Rep for the Tennessee Wildlife Federation. I work primarily with the Hunt and Fishing Academy, and I've really enjoyed sharing my knowledge of the outdoors through these virtual classes. And I look forward to telling you about archery hunting deer, which is something I'm very passionate about here tonight. Also on the call is the manager of the Hunt and Fishing Academy, Taylor Martin. Taylor, would you like to introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about the Zoom functions and kind of the layout for tonight's class?
Yeah, sure thing, Chris. Once again, thanks everybody for logging on and deciding to spend your Tuesday evening with us. Both me and Chris are pretty excited about this topic. Both of us are pretty avid bow hunters, so it's really cool to be a part of this one. But tonight, I'm mainly going to be running the back end of tonight's virtual series. I know many people are pretty familiar with Zoom at this point after a year of quarantine and whatnot, but the best way to interact with us tonight is, if you have a question, is to put it in that Q&A function down there. That's how we're going to manage people's questions. We can't see you or hear you on your end, so feel free to do whatever you need to do. But if you have a question, just pop it into that Q&A function, and either Chris or I will answer it live through the webinar. But if you have anything else that you want to say, or have any thing you just like to put out there for the good of everybody that's on the webinar, you can put that in the chat function, and you can choose how many people see that. And then a little later on, we're going to have a poll question that pops up. So if you can answer that, that's going to help us kind of craft the rest of the content for this call. But other than that, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Taylor. So as Taylor had mentioned, we've got a pop-up survey here. If you just take just a second and answer this, and it'll kind of help me judge the experience level of the participants here tonight. Great. Looks like a good mix. We do have some experienced hunters, and I probably could see some people that might be deer hunting with rifles and muzzleloaders and wanting to break into the sport of archery. And then it looked like we also have some new folks out there learning deer hunting in general. So I think the way I've got this laid out tonight is kind of benefit anybody from the more experienced deer hunter to somebody brand new. And this is a little bit about the overview. Archery hunting for deer is such a broad topic, and I'm very passionate about it. I could probably talk about a day and bore y'all to death with everything that I think is important, but we've got an hour, and we're going to cover what I would consider the basics. I want to cover enough as far as the archery equipment and the types of bows to get you knowledgeable enough to make it to your local archery shop and ask the questions, and they can kind of get you set up there if that's what you're wanting to do. And then later on, we're going to get more into the gear and the biology of deer, and then a little bit about strategy that I use for archery hunting deer. So with that being said, we're going to dive in. We're going to start by talking about the seasons. So you can archery hunt during deer season, any part of the deer season in the state of Tennessee. So if you'll look at this, you've got archery only times, which are, let's see, August 27th through the 29th is that early velvet hunt. And then the 25th starts up the main archery season, runs through the 29th. And then for all parts, CWD units in the west part of the state is kind of different, but November 1st through the 5th in most of the state. CWD rules are a little bit different just because, during muzzleloader, they're allowed to use guns and different things. But in general, you can archery hunt even during the gun, muzzleloader, and archery that you see there in October 30th, October 30th, 31st, if you don't sportsman, but those other dates that's gun only. Feel free to carry your archery equipment if that's what you want to do. You just got to wear that fluorescent orange and abide by the rules, just like you were having a rifle there. So I'm going to go into the different types of bows, and a recurve bow is one of the most primitive ways of archery hunting and one of the purest sports of archery hunting. It really takes a lot of practice to be proficient enough to go hunting with a recurve or a longbow. This don't have any let off. You can see the limbs there where that gentleman has drew. no sights. He's probably aiming by getting an anchor point, which is a consistent spot to always put your hand when you draw, and then maybe using the tip of an arrow or some kind of some people shoot instinct just by pointing, but most people use the tip of an arrow and where it is in association with the target to shoot consistently. Most of these bows can vary from 40 pounds of weight all the way up to 60, and you're holding that full weight whenever you're pulling back a recurve bow. So then we're going to go into a crossbow, which is another legal way to hunt during the archery season in Tennessee. And as you can see, this looks almost like a rifle. It's shouldered like a gun. It's got a scope, and a lot of the things about it is similar to a gun, but you still have a way of storing energy in those limbs. And then this one actually has a cam system, and it allows to take weight and hold that energy inside those cams. And then it just holds back. You pull the trigger similar to a gun. So that's one route, and I'm not going to dive too deep into the different bows, but compound bows, when I think about archery in 2021, I think about a compound bow, and this is what I hunt with. So you can see it's got cams that allows the weight to be let off. Your limbs is what judges how much weight of pull there is. Then the cams can actually give you up to 70 to 80% let off, where you're not holding that full weight when you're at draw. And it lets you hold the bow longer and helps kind of in aiming because you're not under that strain of all that weight. You can also see the peep sight, which is what she's probably looking through as she's aiming. And then you've also got a sighting system out on the end. And I'm going to go through the parts of a compound bow here right quick. So the cam that I was talking about, your limbs, upper and lower, and then you have cables, which kind of holds it all together and works in with the cam system. Your grip, where your hand's going to be, bows come in left-handed or right-handed. If you're a right-handed shooter, your arrow is going to be on the left side of that riser. If you're a left-handed shooter, it's going to be on the right side of the riser. And then the peep sight I mentioned, that when you draw that bow back, you're looking through it, and then you have your bow sight. You're putting that in the center of the peep sight, and then I got one slide here that's going to talk a little bit more about aiming a compound bow, but that's the general parts of it. And there's a ton of different, just like anything else, a ton of different bows out there, different manufacturers, different sizes, different weights. Just like anything else, there's a bunch of decisions, but my goal tonight is to get you where you're knowledgeable enough to ask the questions at your local archery shop or wherever you want to go try to get set up for a bow. The next thing is just talking about the parts of an arrow. So if you look on that image on the right, you're going to see what that's pictured is what I call a field point or a bullet point, and that's a target point. And the reason you shoot those at targets is if you shoot those broadheads, which are used for hunting on the left, you can see where it would really damage your target and make it hard to pull out of your target. So generally you practice with a field point, you have your shaft, and then your fletching is what actually puts helical. That arrow, as it goes through the air, is actually spinning, and that fletching is used to stabilize it. And then down towards the end, you have a knock. That's going to be the part that attaches to your string. While I'm on this slide, I wanted to talk about the different types of broadheads. Again, lots of options, lots of legal options. From left to right, I'll go through. On the left, you have what's called a mechanical broadhead. What that is when that arrow, it's folded up, compact, aerodynamic until it hits the animal. And then like that one in particular folds backwards, and it's going to increase the cutting range as it hits the animal to hopefully do more damage and hopefully ethically harvest that animal quicker, leaving a bigger blood trail, things like that. The ones in the center are what's called fixed blade broadheads. There's a lot of varieties. You can kind of see a couple different ones there. One's like a cut on impact. And then the other one has a ferrule, which is your main shaft part of the broadhead that's longer. And generally, a fixed blade broadhead is something that you can remove the blades and replace them with new ones. And then if we move over to the right, we're basically looking at a traditional cut on contact broadhead there. Most of these traditional heads, you cannot remove the blades from them. So you'll have to sharpen them on it. So it's all about option. Normally, if you were shooting like a recurve bow, you would be somewhere towards the right. Maybe a compound bow, most people prefer mechanical, and then I shoot fixed blade with a compound, but there's no right or wrong answer there. And then real quickly, before we dive into some other stuff, just talking about that general way of aiming. So if you look at this guy, he's got, and I hadn't got a good image of it, but there's a release that's attached to that string, and he's not holding directly to the string with that compound bow. He's got a release in his hand, and it's got a trigger on it. And then you have the peep sight he's looking through, and then he's got a sight out there that's kind of what he's seeing is that image on the right. And you might be confused by seeing 4 pins or 4 sights on one sight housing. If you think about trajectory, and you think about the science and the physics behind archery, if you shoot the top pin, you're going to shoot lower. And then the bottom pin is going to raise your plane of shooting and make the arrow go higher. So what that is, you're compensating for the drop at different yardages. So generally, if I seen that, what I would think is normally a 20 yard, 30 yard, 40. I would shoot a 20, 30, 40, and 50 if I had a 4-pin sight like that. And that's how most people set it up. Now there's, again, tons of options on sights. There's single pin that's adjustable. And all these are legal to use in Tennessee. It all comes down to preference. And then one more thing to point out is you can see that sight has a bubble on it. And it's just like a level that you would use when you're doing carpentry work. You want that bow to be level, perfectly straight up and down. That way, as you get further in yardage, you don't start shooting. Normally you'll shoot left or right if you're doing what's called canning a bow. And that's why that bubble is important. Most sights come with a bubble level like that. So I feel like I dumped a lot of information about the types of bows, but I wanted to at least give you enough knowledge to be able to go and consult professionals at your archery shop or reach back out to the HFA staff, Hunting Fish Academy staff, and we can maybe help fit what type bow is going to fit you best. But have you guys got any questions so far? If you guys don't have any questions, I want to dive into a little bit about where to hunt. Hunting Fishing Academy is seen that one of the biggest barriers for people in Tennessee, or people in the country in general, not getting out and hunting is finding a place to hunt. And we're very lucky in the state of Tennessee to have a vast range of public land opportunities. That comes in the form of TVA lands, wildlife management areas, national refuges, and lots of other public parks and things like that that allow hunting. So one of the big resources is this interactive map through TWRA, and you can find that on Go Outdoors or the Go Outdoors app. And what this is, you see a screenshot of the middle part of the state there. And I've already kind of zoomed in as I took the screenshot. And when you click on one of these highlighted green areas, it's going to give you some options to get more information about it. So on this one in particular, I'm clicking on Cheatham WMA. So it's going to give you an option to get more general regulations and then the specific wildlife management area regulations as well. And that's what it's going to look like. Basically, it's carrying you to a screenshot of the big game brochure. So you can find all this information in there as well. And so depending on what part of the state you are, you can go to that interactive map, and it's a pretty good resource. So if you look at Cheatham there, for example, they do have one quota hunt early September 14th through the 20th, which is a limited draw type hunt. But then starting the 21st through October 17th, it goes into non-quota and you can just hunt it with a wildlife management area permit. So lots of wildlife management areas in the state to check out, and you can find one that suits your area and what you're looking for in a deer hunt. So we've decided where we're going to hunt, and whether it be private property or a wildlife management area. And I'm going to go through a little bit of stuff that I'm looking for as far as strategy for being successful during the archery season. Generally, I'm talking about early season stuff, but I will go into some of the rut activity later on if you was to archery hunt during the gun season. So on the left here is a deer track. And, you know, I've heard a lot of different ways of telling bucks from does based on tracks. And there is some science behind the way a deer steps and their dew claws. And a lot of people say if it's got dew claw marks behind it, it could be a buck. But I've also seen does running fast or soft soil that leaves some. So really it's a size thing for me. I know that if I'm seeing great big deer tracks, it's a good chance it's a buck. Sometimes you'll see a small track with a medium-sized track, probably a yearling or a fawn with a doe. So through experience, you're going to be able to tell kind of what you're looking at. And then there on the right, we've got scat. And again, there would be people say that they can tell a buck from a doe, but mainly what I'm looking for in that is I know there's deer in the area. So other things I'm looking for while I'm scouting on these in these areas is trails. You know, the deer are going to use the path of least resistance, a lot like a human or cattle or anything. And once a numerous amount of animals have used a certain path, it becomes even easier to walk and free to breathe. And then you'll get trails like what you see there on the left. And that's something I'm looking for, especially when archery hunting. And the reason being is we're trying to get inside of, you know, no less than or no more than 30 or 40 yards to have a good, clean, ethical shot. So where if I was rifle hunting, I might would just set up on a field and I know that I can shoot 200 or 300 yards and stand the chance of any deer that comes in the field or any in a bottleneck of woods. But when you're archery hunting, it really changes it in the fact that you have to get close. And that's why finding these trails and the way that deer are leaving bedding areas and going to feed and corridors that they're using is very important. So of all the scouting stuff, that finding those good trails and those corridors is probably the most important part of archery hunting. And then there on the right is a deer bed. And again, early season especially, my whole strategy revolves around getting between the deer's bedding area and their food. So they're normally going to feed, you know, at night and early morning and afternoon, and then they're going to go and bed during the day, and we're trying to catch them in between. So to talk a little bit more about the food aspect, and especially in early season, what I'm looking for, you know, late September, early October is a time in Tennessee when the oak mass is falling, so the acorns are falling down. On up towards the middle to late part of October, you're going to get persimmons that are becoming ripe, which is pictured there on the left, and they're going to be starting to fall on the ground, which is a great food for deer. And these are all things I'm always looking for when I'm doing my scouting, or even when I'm actually going out and hunting. You know, a lot of hunting to me, I know how busy everybody gets. The main thing is get out there and go. And then you scout as you go to your spots and back. And then you climb in or, you know, set up in spots that you can see a long ways. And I'm constantly learning. So I don't want you to get frustrated and say, well, I ain't got time to go scout. Well, go out there, enjoy nature, and then you're going to get better every time you go because you're going to find these food sources. You're going to find the bedding areas and things like that. Another topic, speaking of food, you know, being in West Tennessee, we have lots of agriculture. And I know different parts of the state, deer kind of feed on different things, but, you know, if you can catch a deer out in the open in the fields, obviously that's a great way to get in close to one, see what part of the field they're coming out of or coming out of the wood and going into, and then set up, play the wind. And we're going to get into more of that later on. But this is a picture of a soybean field that's actually been browsed down, and you can see where those deer have been nipping the tops of those soybean plants. And, you know, if you look around, I can even see them there in the image. There could be tracks everywhere, but you can see why the deer are there. They're there to eat them soybeans. So another thing to look for as a food source. And then as far as deer sign goes, the telltale signs of the rut, which is a great time to hunt. That's when the deer are the does are starting to become into estrus and getting ready to be bred. The bucks are in competition for those does, and they're laying down their scent through several different ways. So on the left is a rub, and has the deer have glands right around the pedestals of their antlers that will secrete that scent onto that rub. Kind of says, hey, that's my territory. And they'll do what's called a rub line. So they're kind of making a boundary of what they consider their area during those breeding times. And, you know, that's just a great sign that I'm looking for. I know a buck's in that area and frequenting that area pretty often, normally when there's rubs like that. Even more important is a scrape. And that's what that deer on the right is doing. He's using his paws to scrape back some leaves. And what he's going to do, there's some glands between his toes that secrete some scent. And then also he'll normally urinate on that. And what this is, it's kind of like I would like to think of it as leaving a note. And then a doe comes in and she leaves a little note back, and, you know, they're just kind of communicating through that notepad that's laying there on the ground. And they can identify each other. They know which animal has been there. And more importantly for that buck, it's a gauge of how far along in the estrus cycle those does are. And that's how they're communicating. So when you see those scrapes on the ground, that's a great place to set up. And generally, especially in the archery world, those deer can go directly to those scrapes. So I want to be set up within, 30 yards of a big active scrape like that. One thing I think's worthy of noting in today's world, with just your cell phone, with HuntStand and Onyx, and there's several different ones, that's the two main ones. When I'm doing this scouting, or even when I'm driving around and I'm looking for deer in the off season, it's real easy if you've got those apps downloaded to mark sign, sightings, your actual stand locations. It's really, in my mind, it's a safety thing as well. We're almost past the days, I hate to say it because I'm old fashioned, but we're almost past the days of carrying a compass, because you got that cell phone on you all the time. And I'm going to go into a little bit of my gear bag later on, but as long as you've got that cell phone, you can call for help, you can call 911. And if you keep it charged, you're going to be able to use these mapping apps to get you safely back to a road and get you to your stand location, perhaps in the dark. So it's just a little tidbit there that I think is worth mentioning.
Hey, Chris, before we move on, we got a question from Patrick. He's asking, can you put up a stand on a WMA?
Each wildlife management area has its own set of rules. And as far as a general rule, I think that your stands have to be removed daily. Some of the quota hunts I know do allow for your stands to be put up in advance. Taylor, you dealt with those wildlife management area managers a little bit during our adult class. Do you recall the exact rules on that?
Yeah, so you were right, Chris. The general rule for WMAs is that you have to remove your stand after 24 hours. If you want to leave it there for more than 24 hours, you're supposed to contact the manager for that specific WMA and get permission to do so. So, for example, if you were going to be hunting at Cheatham WMA, you could find the manager's contact information in the back of the hunting guide under Cheatham Wildlife Management Area. And you give him a call, text, and say, hey, this is what I'm wanting to do. I'm wanting to leave a stand out here. And a lot of times they're going to be okay with that. One thing you have to be sure of, it cannot be a permanent stand and it cannot damage the tree. So you can't put nails or screws into the tree. It'll have to be ratchet straps or something that can easily be removed. But as a rule of thumb, if you're going to leave a stand or a blind out on a WMA for an extended period of time, is to get in contact with that manager and let him know about it, just so he's aware. And you would want to put your name somewhere on your blind or your stand along with your TWRA ID number to mark it as yours.
So next on our itinerary here, I want to dive into just very briefly talking about deer senses, deer biology. And the reason I want to do that is learning how deer interact and the way that they use their senses is going to help us be more successful as hunters. So I'm going to start off by talking about vision. And, you know, it's no shocker that deer have great vision. They are constantly, way before man was ever hunting them, you know, they were being pursued by predators, and everything they do is to avoid predation. And in our case, probably their biggest predator now is humans. So they've learned through decades that what danger comes in lots of forms, and I'll talk about it a little bit on the hearing part, but they see things and they relate it back to human pressure, and they hear things and they know that it's a human. So they can see about 5 times better than human. They don't see colors on the high end of the spectrum like orange as well as we do. They see it through a different way. Their configuration of rods and cones in their eyes also allow them to see very well at night. And what this allows them to do is when they get pressured during the day by humans and other predators, they can go and move primarily at night to when there is no pressure. So that's just a few tidbits. You can also see in that image talking about what I would call peripheral vision. They can see off the sides of their heads, where most predators, in general, predators see a head, cone shape, and prey animals that are not carnivores are going to see more 180, kind of like what you see there. So when you go to draw your bow, where this really plays in a factor is you've got to really make sure that you have something between you and them. The deer is really calm, looking directly away from you. There's a lot of factors when you're trying to draw a bow inside of 40 yards, and that's where understanding the way deer's eyes work is very important. Again, the hearing, they hear exceptionally well. They've got those big old ears, and if you've seen deer, you see them turning, and they can pinpoint sound extremely well. And again, they hear sounds, they hear a four-wheeler, they hear the clinking of your boots going up a ladder, and they're not dumb. Through repetition, they understand that every time I hear that four-wheeler, I see or smell a human, and I know what that means. So therefore, I'm leaving. So you got to understand the way hearing and understanding the way they hear and the way they associate sounds with human presence, and play that into your strategy to be successful. Keep talking about smell even on accident, as I was talking about them other ones, just because this is the most important thing. You know, a deer can see something and he might not be real sure exactly what that is. If you sit real still, they might even kind of forget you're there. Same thing with hearing. They hear things all day, all night. You know, if they run from every time a leaf crunched, then they would be running all the time. You know, there's other animals, squirrels, deer, you know, raccoons, everything in those woods with them. So, but when they smell you, they know exactly what it is. is. They probably know who you are. I would think they probably can separate one human from another through time. It's amazing what they can do. So if you look at those notes there, 297 million olfactory receptors compared to 5 million in a human. So they can hear, they can smell extremely well, even up to a distance of 200 or 300 yards. There's lots of things that you can do to reduce your scent. Don't smoke cigarettes before you go out hunting. The things that coffee and things that obviously you can smell, then they can smell them even better. You can shower down in some different antibacterial soaps and things that are known to reduce the smell. There is ozone that reduces smell. There's ozone generators. I do occasionally use an ozone machine in a box, and it's a good way to kill the bacteria that causes scent on your clothes. You can wear rubber boots, and then there's a lot of cover scents. So in other words, I'm trying to drown out my human scent by using a natural scent like a raccoon urine or some type of urine to try to drown out that smell. But when it all comes down to it, one thing I've learned over the last 20 years is the only way to keep deer from smelling you is staying on the downwind side of them. So in other words, you want the wind blowing from you to them as if you were smelling them. And that is how my whole archery strategy, that's what it revolves around. It all revolves around wind direction. If you think about Tennessee, and this changes, it's funny as you go to different parts of the world, but our jet streams in Tennessee normally move southwest to northeast, and we generally have some sort of a westerly wind. I would say less than 3 to 7% of the days a year, we have an easterly wind. So I'm always thinking about that as I'm building my plan and I'm hanging my deer stands. I hang for southwest winds, I hang for north and northwest winds, and then I might have something that I would consider a good east wind or a stand that might not matter about wind, that I would go in there on those days. So understanding the smell, the way deer use their nose, and factoring all that in and playing the wind. So we're going to dive in to, I called it early season clothing just because we got archery season coming up. We've even got the velvet hunt coming up later in the month. And then we're going to start into the main archery season in September. So I think that's a time when a lot of your archery hunters are out in the woods. And I wanted to touch on just what I wear. And I think this guy is pretty much wearing what I would. I very rarely ever wear short sleeve shirts, even though it's hot, just because of the bug factor. It does give you a little bit of concealment, but there's some thin long sleeve shirts out there that you can wear and not get real hot. I do like to wear full camo hat, pants, and shirt, just because of the vision that the deer have. And I like to find colors, not real specific on what camo brand. I just want to be relative to the time of year. So if I'm hunting a lot of green stuff, I might wear more green, but something kind of like what he's got there is going to get you through most of the fall. I also wear rubber knee boots. Now, they're probably a little bit warmer, even the uninsulated ones, than other shoes out there, but it goes back to scent control. I don't think that rubber leaves as much scent. I'm not really concerned about snakes, but if you do have a snake concern, then rubber boots is a good way to keep you from, getting bit, possibly if it's still warm out and snakes are out. And then if I'm just going to cross a creek or something, I don't like to have to, walk stones or limbs or something like that. I've got knee boots on, I can just walk across it. Plus mine, I feel like my rubber knee boots are very comfortable. But back into the camo part, pants, I do tuck those into my knee boots, keeps them from getting wet. And again, I don't feel like that rubber leaves as much scent on the grass as if you had your pants legs down there. Some of the coldest days I've ever had in the woods was when the temperatures was in the 40s and I was dressed for 80s. So that's why I've got where I almost always carry a light jacket for early morning and late evening, even during that early season. And then, like I mentioned, that hat.
Hey, Chris, before we get too far along, we got a couple of questions about scents that popped up. Kirk is asking if you've ever used baking powder to remove scent. Says heard that a long time ago, but wasn't sure if it worked.
I've never heard of baking powder. I know baking powder. So, my family has always put baking soda and baking powder in the refrigerator for that reason. And it pulls the scent from different things out of the refrigerator. So I could see where that could happen, where that could help. But, there's so many products out there that is made just for washing clothes that, I would just go to the sporting goods section of an outdoor store or Walmart or something, and you can find you some powder. And not only is it going to help kill the bacteria that causes odor, but something I've really found as far as those more pricey powders and stuff is, I don't wear a lot of cotton, but in your polyester blends of clothing, it preserves the color. And, if you wash those, obviously, if you're hunting them in September and you're sweating, you're going to wash them every time. My November clothes very rarely get washed, but in September, you're washing those clothes a lot. And if you're using, just regular fabric stuff, it does seem like it makes them fade a little bit quicker compared to some of the stuff that's intended to preserve those colors. That's the main reason I use some of the fancy hunting brand, but you could definitely try it, and I might do some more reading on that just for my own knowledge of what's out there.
Then Melanie has a question of what do you think are some of the best cover scents to use?
I grew up using raccoon urine and things like that were, that was when trapping has kind of died down over the years, but you could real readily available get those things of like bobcat pee and raccoon urine and different things. But probably I use actual deer urine, those deer scents more now. There's one out there, and I'm drawing a blank, but there's one that's probably the most popular cover scent that smells to me like straight vanilla extract. And if you read on the bottle, it's a calming scent to a deer. It's supposed to be natural. Now, I had never walked through the woods and smelled a bunch of vanilla out there, but there's probably been a million deer shot over that cover scent. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I'm not a big cover scent person in general. I'm more about playing the wind, and I don't want them to smell the cover scent or my scent because I know I can't override my scent. If you made me pick one thing that I could only use to help me with my scent for the rest of my life, I'm going to say ozone. And I don't mean the high dollar ozone generators. That's great if you can afford one, but you can buy about a $15 or $20 ozone machine that's used to pull mildew and different things from like a basement or something like that. And you can put those in a box. They even make a 12-volt one that'll stick in your cigarette lighter for on the way. It does seem to help. I've seen some deer smell that ozone and smell me and not really know what it is. I do say that does help some. Now, there is one warning. Don't go out and jump in a coffin with an ozone generator and say Chris told you to, because it is bad for you. They say don't use those in congested areas. So normally when I use it, I'm putting my clothes in a box or something and letting it kill that bacteria, and then I take them out, let them air out, put them on. So, but I'm going to dive back in. We're getting towards the end. But this is, in my mind, an archery hunter's backpack. These are things that I'm going to have with me in the early season. Well, really throughout the whole season, but a rangefinder, which is going to help me judge distance. Now, whether I'm ranging the deer right before I shoot, or if I'm ranging objects, whether it be trees, limbs, grass patches, and memorizing or marking those ranges. So when a deer walks up, I've already ranged this tree at 20 yards. I know the deer is 20 yards. I don't even have to range it. I shoot it. Or part of my system is actually ranging right before I put my release on and draw and shoot. Back to the release, got to have that. If you're used to practicing with a release and you're shooting a compound bow and you don't have your release, probably going to struggle. I know I do. Binoculars, this is something that goes back to just being observant. If you're hunting a field or even in woods that's open, use those binoculars, see where the deer are moving, identify different deer, and build that knowledge base that's going to help you maybe move on them and get closer for that archery shot on the next hunt. Back to the apps and the phones, we've got our phones with us, and I know a lot of people, I'm one of them, I want to turn my phone off when I get to the woods because that's my time with nature. But for the safety aspect and the app, the mapping apps, I think it's important to keep your phone at least in your pack. And I keep a portable charger in there all the time. That way I never have to deal with a dead battery in an emergency situation. Flashlight, I'm all about reducing weight, but if you're hunting deep and you could potentially be tracking a deer after dark, I would carry a decent sized one. As far as something to walk in the dark in the morning and out in the dark in the evening, I use a very, very small light that runs on 1 AAA, but just kind of depends on how far from your truck, if you're going to want to go back to your truck to get a bigger light to track, or if you just want to keep it in your pack and carry that weight. A limb saw on wildlife management areas, just like Taylor said, you can't damage those trees, but if you're hunting private property, especially if you're using something like a climbing stand, which I'm going to cover next, that limb saw comes in handy lots of times. Thermocell, early season, what this is it's, you can see it in the side pocket there. This is something that secretes a smell that bugs don't like, and it really is a lifesaver in September. But you're saying, well, you just said deer smell real well. Well, it don't matter. If you can't stand to sit out there in the woods because of the mosquitoes, it don't matter. You're not going to kill them at home avoiding the mosquitoes. So thermocells, I don't use them often, but when times get hard and the mosquitoes are drinking your blood, I like to have it where I can crank it up. And then also I don't get carried away with a 20-ounce bottle of water generally, unless I'm setting a long period during the day. I use them little small ones and I just keep it in there. And really more than to stay hydrated, I do it because y'all have heard me as I sit here on this virtual class, I cough some when I start getting a dry mouth, and I keep that bottle of water where if I do have a coughing spell, I can take a sip of water, kill that cough, and not run every deer out of the county. And then also I run trail cameras. I didn't even cover them in this virtual class. I could talk another 30 minutes about them. But if you are running trail cameras, either on public property or private, I keep SD cards or potentially a card reader and batteries in my pack where I'm not making 2 trips in. If I go in to hunt and I'm hunting near a camera, I'll swing in there, swap the cards out, and I'm out of there, and I keep them in my pack all the time. So any questions before I dive in to actual setting up and strategy about the gear that I've covered in the last couple of slides? What is the best backpack? Kirsty asked. There's a million different ones out there, and I like to be light and efficient. I've got one, I think I ordered it on Amazon. It was about $15. And it was a military backpack that was small. I wanted something that wouldn't hang on limbs as I climbed. It's got lots of pockets. And again, this is an early season style backpack when I'm not carrying a bunch of extra clothes. When it cools down, I'm going to go to a bigger backpack just because I don't want to walk long distances with all my clothes on. I want to be able to get in that pack and pull my clothes out, put them on just as I climb the tree. So, you know, you can spend $200 on a Sitka pack, or you can go to Walmart or Amazon and buy one of these military surplus bags, or one of your little, I think it's maybe Field and Stream, might be saying that wrong, but the Walmart brand, and they're probably just as good. All right, if we don't have any more questions about gear, I just quickly want to cover. So we've talked about the sign we're looking for. We've talked about the senses deer have and what we're going to do to try to better our position to harvest those deer and elude them when they're using those senses. So tree stands is by far the most popular way, especially in Tennessee, to get up kind of out of the current of the wind and try to beat their nose. It helps definitely with their sight. You know, I hear about deer that's been pressured enough, and I've heard, you know, the old wise tales about deer that walk around with their head up because they get so much hunting pressure and human pressure from trees. But generally speaking, it is a lot easier to get a bow drawn and get a nice close 40-yard and in shot from a tree stand. That's just me. You can see, so ladder stand on the left, what is in the middle is what would be called a hang-on stand. And you have to use a different type of like climbing stick or something to get in that stand. And then on the right, I think that one might have come over on the Mayflower, but that's a climbing stand there on the right. And there's a lot more that's way more comfortable and stuff than that one, but you can see the principle of using the jacking system to go up the tree without having to have anything to help you climb. Outside of tree stands, another way to set up that ambush is ground blinds. So pictured left is like a store-bought hay bale blind. I really like the way that they use that. There's a hay bales already out there. They put it out there. Deer are used to walking by the hay bales. A more popular style would be your hub style blinds. And the only thing I can say, if you look at the image on the right, I guess, that's a natural blind built from natural stuff. Again, you can't cut that vegetation on public wildlife management areas and stuff in the state, but on private property, that's a great strategy. What I was going to say, it's crazy that like a turkey can be in a field, fly up in a tree, fly down the next day, and there'll be a big camouflage hub blind in the middle of the field, and they're oblivious to it. They fly down, they act like it's been there their whole life. A deer, on the other hand, they pay extreme attention to what was there the last time they were there, and if something's changed, they're going to key in on it. So if you're going to use any type of ground blind, especially something that's not natural, you're going to want to put that out several days in advance, let the deer get used to it. You know, in some of the places I hunt, I'm putting my blinds out and brushing them in with natural cover 2 weeks ago in preparation for October and November, because I don't want to take any chance of the deer, you know, being wise to it. So that's some good advice about ground blinds. There is some disadvantage in the way that, you know, you can't get away from the scent. You're down eye level with them. But as far as drawing your bow, if you get a good backdrop and you get blacked out back in there, you take control of your scent, you can be successful from the ground. So then we're winding down, and I'll cover this next couple, and then we're going to open up to questions. But this is probably the most elementary general example of how I would set up early archery. So if you look at it, we've got a bedding area, and you can see it pictured there. We've got a wind direction that's blowing like that, and then you got your food source off over there to the left. So the basic principle in this situation, and this is it can be repeated on a larger scale as you think about your hunting area. But we've got a bedding area, we've got a food source. I'm wanting to be between the bedding area and the food source, and I've got to be downwind. So when you put all them things into your little strategy calculator, you come to something like the place where I put the X there on that tree. And hopefully that deer is going to get up and pass directly to the food source. You're going to know some of these things based on the sign we talked about, the travel corridors. And then another important thing to think about as you guys look at this, and I'm gonna ask you a question, but where would you enter that tree stand? You got a tree stand right there where the red X is. As far as where you're going to park your truck and how you're going to access that area, how would you guys do that? And I want you to study on it just here for a few seconds. So we know that being downwind at the time the deer comes by is important, but it's just as important when you're entering and exiting your stand. So I would be somewhere way on the downwind side of that field. I would probably hug that fence line and stay just inside the woods in case there was a deer close to that opening in the field there that they could see me. And then I would ease in as quietly and directly as I could to that stand. Sometimes you can utilize a creek. I've utilized a canoe if you've got a river system or something that you can get in real quietly. But those are just things to think about. I wanted to get your mind working on basic strategy for archery hunting. Last thing before I open it up for questions, and we're actually doing pretty good on time, right on the money. But, we get a lot of questions about shot placement. And this image here, the one on the right is a breakdown of the heart and the lungs and the liver, as you can see, represented by red, orange, and purple, I guess. And then you get back into the guts and things like that. That probably the biggest enemy to an archery hunter is that big shoulder plate. You can see it there, shaped kind of like a piece of pizza there. Unless you're shooting something built for rhinos, it's very hard to pierce that shoulder blade. So you want to try to stay back behind that. The last consideration to think about is your angle. We talked about hunting from a tree stand compared to the ground. If you're shooting from the ground, it's easy to get two lungs that sit side by side and make a good ethical shot like that. If you're from a stand perspective and the deer's real close to you, you could possibly only get one lung if you shoot a little bit high or low. So just play all those things in. And then the last thing, as far as shot placement, I think there's actually even an app out there somebody was telling me about that you can take the picture of the deer and you can touch where you hit it, and it's going to tell you where what vitals potentially and how long you should wait. But I always err to the side of caution as far as the wait time before I get down and start tracking a deer. In other words, if I shoot one even through the lungs, I'm giving it a minimum of 30 minutes to go and expire. And that way, when I start walking that blood trail, I don't jump that deer up and, potentially it clots up and runs off where it would have just laid there and passed away had I not bothered it. So there's a lot of little things like that. We're gonna be sending out some follow-up emails along with a recording of this. I know I talked real quick to try to fit all this in, but I want you guys to shoot me an email or my phone number is listed on the website. You're welcome to give me a call if you want more specific information about archery hunting. If you guys don't have any questions, then we're going to let you get back to enjoying your evening. And thank you guys for attending the virtual class tonight on archery deer hunting.